Hey, I'm here with Keith Lima, who's starting a new series of podcasts called Raw Vegan Science. And I'm delighted to be involved in this first one. So I'm here to find out about your nutritional history. So why don't we start at the beginning, which is a very good place to start.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So my name is Keith Lima. I'm a registered nurse. I've been a nurse for about 8 years now. And I became a vegan about 5 years ago. If you had told me 10 years ago that I was going to be a vegan, I would have said you were crazy. I became a vegan for health reasons. So some years ago, I was living in Seattle, and I was working in an emergency room out in Seattle, and my blood pressure was very high, 170 over 100 high. And I knew that I needed to do something about the blood pressure, but like any good nurse, I ignored my own health. Right? So one day I'm at work. We're in the middle of a meeting, and I start feeling pain to my mid upper back. And I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. Maybe I moved the patient the wrong way or whatever. I don't know what it was. And then I started driving back to my apartment after the meeting, and I started noticing that the pain was beginning to shift from my mid upper back to now my mid upper chest. And I thought, no, this is nothing cardiac. No way. I'm too young to be having anything cardiac going on. So I went home and I had lunch. I had a bite to eat, and I swallowed, and as I swallowed, I felt searing pain going down my esophagus. So I said, okay, well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is it's probably not cardiac. The bad news is there's something going on with my esophagus.
Wow.
So instead of going to the emergency room, I figured it wasn't cardiac. I went to urgent care and I got checked out. And the nurse practitioner that evaluated me noted that I had high blood pressure. And he diagnosed me with something called achalasia, which is a tightening of your esophagus. And he said achalasia is typically seen in people with high blood pressure.
And the symptoms are the back pain. Were the symptoms connected to?
Yes, yeah. So there's this thing called referred pain. And referred pain is when you have pain in one part of the body, but you feel it somewhere else. So essentially, your brain has the right street, but the wrong house, right? And that's essentially what referred pain is, right? So the pain was being started. The pain was starting in my esophagus, but I was feeling it in my back and then my chest. So the nurse practitioner prescribed me a medication called carvedilol, which is it's a blood pressure medication, which was interesting because I was having pain in my esophagus, and he said, well, the carvedilol, it's a smooth muscle relaxer, so it's going to lower your blood pressure, but your esophagus is also smooth muscle, so it's going to loosen up your esophagus as well. So I went to CVS, I had the carvedilol filled, and I went home, and I'm looking at the bottle of carvedilol, and I thought about all of my patients that I had who were not on one medication or two. They had 5 bottles or 10, 15. I mean, I've seen people on upwards of 25 medications. And I thought about how that started for them. And it all started with one medication. It started with one bottle. And then it grew. And I thought, well, I had known for several years that my blood pressure had been climbing, that my weight had been climbing, and my primary care physician had told me at some point, well, if you lose some weight and eat healthier, I guarantee you your blood pressure would drop at least somewhat. He said if you lost 10 pounds, I guarantee you'd see some drop in your blood pressure. So I'm standing there in my kitchen and I'm holding the bottle of carvedilol like this, and I'm thinking to myself, I've got one of two options here. I can start taking this medication and go down that road. And if I start taking this medication, then this isn't going to be the only medication I take in my life. It's going to lead to a second drug and a third drug and a fourth drug. And then by the time I'm in my 70s, I'm going to be on 15, 20, 25 meds like a lot of other people in that age group. And it's all going to start here with this one bottle of carvedilol. On the other hand, I could follow my primary care physician's advice, my previous PCP's advice, and work as hard as I could to give it the best try that I could to reduce my weight, start exercising again, and hopefully see a drop in blood pressure. Cut out the excess salt in my diet and try to improve it that way. And I thought, well, I'm going to give it the old college try, and I'm going to try my best. And if it doesn't work, then I'll try the medication. So I began making changes to my diet. The first thing I did was I cut out all the extra salt. And I noticed that my blood pressure came down a little bit more.
Do you use salt to season, or is that what you would say is?
So at the time, I was cooking everything that I was cooking. I was adding extra salt to. Typical American diet, you're not going to have an issue with finding salt. So I cut out all the extra salt, and my blood pressure came down a little bit, 160s instead of 170s. Then I decided to go a step further, and I adopted, at the time, what was called the DASH diet, which stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And that is a diet that is heavy on it's heavy on fruits and vegetables. It's not a vegan diet. It allows meat and cheese and so forth, but it's extremely heavy on plant-based recipes. So I did that, and I noticed my blood pressure came down even more, 150s instead of 160s. I thought, okay. So I started doing a little bit more learning, and I came across the kosher diet. And so I adopted the kosher diet, which has various restrictions on the type of meats that you can eat, how things are prepared, and so forth. And I adopted the kosher diet, and my blood pressure came down even more, 140s as opposed to 150s. So with each change that I was making towards a healthier lifestyle, my blood pressure was coming down, and the weight started to come off. The most that I weighed, I was never morbidly obese, but the most I weighed was 190 pounds when I was in nursing school. For my height, that's definitely overweight. That's not obese, but that's overweight for my height, and not healthy for somebody who has pre-existing hypertension. So I adopted the kosher diet. My blood pressure came down even more. I went through a divorce, which wasn't easy. That adds to the stress. That adds to your blood pressure. And I moved back to New England from Seattle, all the while continuing my research in diet and exercise and health. And how could I apply this to my patients? And I came across several documentaries on the vegan diet, and subsequently decided to adopt a vegan diet. My blood pressure came down even more, 130s as opposed to 140s or 170s. And more recently, I've adopted a raw vegan diet, which is essentially fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds that are not heated above 118 degrees. can you be healthy with a regular vegan diet? If it's a healthy regular vegan diet, sure. There's a big difference between sweet potatoes and donuts. Right? Big difference. Big difference. But based on my research, it became apparent that a raw vegan diet, if I was not that, and again, not that there's anything wrong with a regular vegan diet so long as it's healthy, but I came to the conclusion that a raw vegan diet was probably the healthiest diet on earth that I could ever adopt. And if I've come this far, I might as well go one step further.
You've hit a bit about this, but I wonder if there are any further definitions regarding the differences between being a vegan, a vegetarian, or just eating a plant-based diet. Are there major differences?
Sure. So vegetarian is a diet where you don't eat any animal meats. It is heavy on plants, vegetables, and fruits. But you can eat dairy, so things like milk and cheese. Right? A vegan diet is a little bit more restrictive. So a vegan diet is just fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds.
No carbs.
So carbohydrates. Even in a raw vegan diet, which is the most restrictive, you can have carbohydrates. The issue is not so much the carbohydrates; it's where the carbohydrates are coming from, right? So a regular vegan diet, a raw vegan diet, a vegetarian diet, they all allow carbs. A diet that does not allow any carbs or is severely restrictive of carbs is called a keto diet. And there is such a thing as keto vegan. Typically when you hear a keto diet, it's heavy on the meats, no bread, no pasta, that sort of thing.
Have you fallen off the wagon? And if you haven't, what is the thing that you most crave that you've disciplined yourself to not ingest?
Sure. So that's actually a good question. So there are a lot of people out there, when they look at a vegan diet, they're purist. And I'm of the belief that if something is healthy for you, then why do something that's not healthy? However, I do think there are some instances in life where you can bend a little. For example, a few years ago, my sister got married. And I had a vegan option on the menu for the wedding. But her wedding cake was not vegan. So she's my only sister. She's my only sibling. And it's a life event. I had a piece of cake. And does that mean that the 99.9% of the time where I'm eating vegan and I'm not eating cake that's made with dairy and eggs, does that mean I'm not a vegan because I had a slice of cake at my sister's wedding? I don't think so. I get that there's a lot of zeal in the vegan world, and I get it because the vegan diet is so effective, and it is very effective at improving your health. But you also have to realize that there are things like life events. Now, I just listened to a podcast yesterday, and one of the individuals on the podcast said, "Well, okay, I don't remember which podcast this was. I'm sorry, but one of the individuals said, well, okay, if you're a raw vegan and you go to parties, don't shy away from going to the party. Make some raw vegan food, bring it to the party so that other people can see your lifestyle." And that's a great option, right? That's a great option. So have I fallen off the wagon? There have been extremely limited times when I chose to eat something that was not vegan because it was either a life event or what have you, right? However, for the past coming up on 5 years now, 99.99% of the time, it's just vegan because I do believe that it's kind of like smoking is not healthy. Everyone knows smoking is not healthy. I do not smoke. Never smoked a cigarette in my life. Am I going to smoke a cigarette at a party or a wedding? No. I don't drink. I haven't drank in years. Would I drink at a wedding? When I got married, I didn't even drink at my own wedding because I had this realization that it's not healthy. You're starting out negative, and people out there want to drink socially. Okay, just know that it toxifies your body. And I think one of the things that is difficult, and what we'll explore on this channel, is I've come to the conclusion. I used to be an angry vegan, right? I became vegan. It's like, doesn't everybody realize that being vegan is the best? Why would you have any other diet other than being vegan? Can't you tell that fast food is killing you? So I went through that angry stage, but over the past year and a half, I came to the conclusion that addiction is probably the core reason why most people don't choose to adopt a healthier diet, whether it's vegan or not, right? Because there are diets that are not vegan that are healthier than the typical American diet. For example, the DASH diet. But people choose not to adopt those because they feel it's hard. And why is it hard? And I've come to the conclusion it's because typical American diet is very addictive. So the core reason why we have all the illness in the developed world is, yes, it's the food, but it's more basic than that. It's people are walking around addicted. In particular, food addiction, and I think the case can be said of all addiction, no matter regardless of what it is. But I think in particular, food addiction, people go for the cheeseburger or the fried chicken or the pizza or whatever it is, the bag of chips, because they're either stressed out, they just get home from work, they're stressed out.
It's emotional eating.
It's emotional eating, or they're stressed out, or they have anxiety, or some other type of pain, and they think that eating that food, or taking that drink, or the drugs, or whatever it is, they think it's going to relieve them of that pain or discomfort, whatever it is, emotional, physical, what have you. But in actuality, it only makes it worse. And it is partly the cause of much of their pain.
I have a couple more things to ask you. I want to go back to this hypothetical party where you have brought a tasty vegan appetizer.
Sure.
So a couple who are cheeseburger eaters comes up and they see this thing on the buffet table, and you're standing there and you say, why don't you give it a try? And they're very skeptical, but then they do, and they really enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And then you engage in conversation, and they express an interest of beginning to partake of this diet. What's the first thing you would say to the novice who has an intention to change?
Well, if they have an intention to change, first off, that's a good thing. Unfortunately, many people Many people don't. And again, I've said that there are a lot of vegans out there that are very zealous, and that's great. That's great. But I think a lot of vegans they have to come to an understanding that a lot of people choose to not adopt a healthier diet because of the addictive properties of food, because of things like food addiction, because they want to come home and have that meal and de-stress or think that it's helping them out with the stress and the anxiety and the emotional pain. So there's this belief that it's helping them when it's not. So when you understand that the general population eats this way because they don't realize that there's an underlying addiction going on, or that they're trying to alleviate this pain. It's you can get your message across as a vegan a lot better if you realize this. So somebody at a party who wants to embark on a healthier diet, I would say take it one step at a time. I didn't become vegan overnight. Between me having that chest pain and becoming a raw vegan, that was a road that lasted almost 5 years.
Yeah.
December 5th of this year will be 5 years. It took almost 5 years for me to become raw vegan. And I tried like crazy to become raw vegan, and it was difficult. I was a vegan, but then I tried to become raw vegan, and it took me, I'd say, over a year before I finally became raw vegan, because food's addicting.
Yeah.
Right? But I would say take it one step at a time. I would say, depending on whether or not the person has type 2 diabetes, if they don't have type 2 diabetes, I would say start with fruit. Buy as much fruit as you can, and fruit can be your gateway drug to a healthier life. If you do not have type 2 diabetes and your sugar is elevated, because this is kind of important, because there are raw vegans out there who started out with type 2 diabetes and they started out with fruit. Well, that's great, but some of these raw vegans, it took them 2.5 years before their sugar came down, and their type 2 diabetes essentially went away. And that's because although they were eating healthier, they were eating fruits which were heavy in carbohydrates. So if you're not, and I can already hear people out there complaining, well, what are you talking about? I went raw vegan and I had type 2 diabetes and I started out with fruit and I'm fine. Absolutely. Number one, how bad was your type 2 diabetes? Number two, how long did it take you? So you start out one step at a time. And if you don't have type 2 diabetes, start out with the fruit. If you do have type 2 diabetes, well, raw vegan is fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. Then you start out with the salads. Let me give you a little example. Let me give you a story. My father has type 2 diabetes. And me being around my family as a vegan, of course, I was always pumping vegan. And my father starts eating all this fruit, but at the same time, he's still eating the fast food. He's still eating the typical American diet. The fast food, the chips, the cold cuts, the sandwiches, you name it, right? So I started noticing that he just looked different. And knowing my dad and being a nurse, I think subconsciously I was making a connection, but I didn't realize it at the time. And I'm like, something about this is just different. And I went to bed one night and I had this nightmare that my father collapsed on the kitchen floor. And he passed out. And and I'm screaming for help. And I woke up and I'm like, man, that was a scary nightmare. What was that all about? And I think my subconscious was trying to put the pieces together. And I noticed that as time went on, as the weeks progressed, that my father's eyes appeared to be sunken in. And unbeknownst to me, my father was going to work extremely exhausted, tired all the time. He said my father's a locksmith at a hospital. He has his own lock shop, and he went into his lock shop. He was extremely exhausted, and thought to himself, "I'm just going to sit here and take a nap for 15 minutes." And he sat in his lock shop. It was the middle of the summer. He turned on the air conditioner in the lock shop. He closed the door, and he just sat back, thinking it was going to be about 15 minutes. And he woke up over an hour later and thought, "Oh my God, there's something wrong." And he's thinking, well, something's not right. Maybe my time is up. Maybe I should start thinking about putting together a will because something's not. I don't know, Dad. I mean, see a doctor, but this is what was unbeknownst to me, my sister, my mother. So my mother has a glucometer at home. So he checks his sugar on the glucometer, and the glucometer reads high. Now, I'm an ER nurse. When a person comes in and their glucometer reads high, or EMS checks their sugar and their glucometer reads high, it typically means that their sugar is above 550, above 600, depending on the glucometer. That's extremely high. Your sugar should be somewhere between 70 to 110. Right? It's extremely high. So I'm thinking, high. Now, if you're a type 1 diabetic, you go to the emergency room, your sugar's that high, you'll typically be in something called diabetic ketoacidosis, what we call DKA. There is something similar to that for type 2 diabetics. It's very similar. But either way, it wasn't good. And I said, Dad, we need to get you to the hospital. He said, no, I'm fine. He checked his sugar again, and it was in the 500s. At least it wasn't high anymore, but at least the glucometer didn't say it was high anymore, but it was still the 500s. And I said, Dad, honestly, if you were one of my patients in the ED and your sugar was this high, we would be giving you IV fluids, we would be giving you insulin, we would probably be repleting your potassium if it were low. I mean, you would be in the ICU for a couple of days while we adjusted things. I said, I really want to get you to the hospital. And that's another thing. I mean, people may think, well, because I'm a raw vegan or vegan, what have you, that I think that there's no place for modern medicine. No, that's true. But I think there's a difference between something that's chronic and something that's acute. This is acute, right? So my father said, no, I don't want to go in and get checked out. Okay, all right, Dad, kind of stubborn. I said, here's what we're going to do. We need to get your sugar down. And this is how we're going to do it. You're going to have a vegan diet. And as much as I would like to feed you fruit, your sugar is too high. If we give you fruit right now, you could end up in the ICU. We can't. Even though fruit is generally healthy, and a raw vegan diet is fruit, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. But in that particular case, eating fruit could have killed them. But I said, here's what we're going to do. You're going to eat a vegan diet. You're not going to be eating any fruit. We're going to be checking your sugar 3 times a day. We're going to be checking your sugar morning, noon, and evening. You're not taking anything for the medication. You don't want to go in. You're not going to be eating any fruit, but here's what we're going to do. You're going to be eating salads, and you're going to be eating vegetables. And we're not going to have any carbohydrates on that salad. It's going to be essentially vinegar or whatever type of dressing that you want that's not heavy on carbohydrates, and maybe a little bit of oil. Okay. So he starts doing that. So his sugar starts coming down, upper 400s, keeps checking it. Day 2, mid 400s, low 400s, upper 300s. And as coincidence would have it, he happened to have a doctor's appointment early on in this particular week. He went in, had blood work done, and they found out that his A1C was, I believe, 15.5, which is atrocious. I've seen higher, but that's atrocious. And his doctor said, while we're adjusting his diet and he's only eating salads and vegetables and very slim on the carbohydrates, his doctor made an appointment with an endocrinologist towards the end of the week. So, okay, he's got an appointment for an endocrinologist, and we're working on his diet, and he's going out for walks. He's exercising, which is also excellent because when you exercise, that opens up the gates in your cells to allow glucose to pass in, which is excellent. So his sugar keeps coming down, mid 300s, low 300s, no medication, upper 200s, and finally we get it down and it's in the 70s and 80s. So he goes
Over a period of how long?
Over a period of 8 days.
Wow.
With no medication. No medication, no insulin. My mother, on the very first day, gave him 1 tablet of metformin, but that barely moved the needle at the beginning. And that was the only tablet he took. From there on, it was nothing but diet that got him from the upper 400s down to 70s and 80s.
Amazing.
And
in 8 days.
In 8 days. And he went to his endocrinologist. And his endocrinologist, of course, I guess they checked the sugar, and redid labs and all of that. And my father had a log of all of the sugars that he had checked 3 times a day for the past 8 days. He had a log. And the endocrinologist looked at it and he said, "That's great." He said, "What are you taking for medication?" And he said, "I'm not." And the endocrinologist goes, "What do you mean?" My father said, "I'm not taking any medication." He said, my son, he probably said, "My crazy vegan son." Yeah, I don't know. But he said, "Well, my son had me change my diet, and I've been going for exercises. I've been going for walks, and I managed to get my sugar down."
Did he lose weight during that time? He must
Yes,
have.
he did. Yes, he did. And so the endocrinologist said, "Well, that's great. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." He said, "But I just got to ask you, you're not taking any medication?" I said, "No." He says, "I'm going to ask you one more time. You're not taking any medication at all?" I said, "No." They said, "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up."
It's the proof.
That's the proof.
Maybe one more question? Or
yeah.
There's a lot of information. We're ingesting information, and information is disseminated to us by 1,000 million sources.
Sure.
Tell us how you're customizing this, what your intention is in accruing an audience and passing on some great tips for a healthier lifestyle. How are you different? How is the Keith Lima Raw Vegan Science more scientific?
I'm glad you asked. So in the vegan world, anything diet related, there are so many opinions out there. Everybody has their own opinions. Everybody has their own beliefs. Some of them are correct. Some of them are not. My approach to this channel is to base that information on science and historical evidence. Okay. So in particular in the raw vegan space, people are very zealous in the raw vegan space, which I think they should be. Because raw vegan really is the healthiest diet out there. But why is it the healthiest diet out there? What is the scientific evidence for that? And that is not something that you typically hear on raw vegan channels. And I want to bring that into the space. You're a raw vegan, great. You're thinking about becoming just a regular vegan, great. All positive improvements in your life. But I think there's an absence of scientific data out there, at least that's being shown on various podcasts and YouTube channels and so forth. And there's a vacuum there that needs to be filled, because people need to understand the scientific background to all of this, right? And it is true. Raw vegan is the healthiest diet you can go. And there's a spectrum, right? Some diets are healthier than others. And at the healthiest end of the spectrum is raw vegan. But people need to understand. In particular, in the raw vegan space, there's a question of whether or not, what is truly healthier. Is it healthier to eat raw vegetables, for example, or is it healthier to cook them, right? And there is data to show that when you cook vegetables, that you can release more nutrients. So for example, if you cook carrots, it will release more beta carotene than you would absorb if it were uncooked. Okay, that is technically true. And that is not something you typically hear on raw vegan channels. But I'm a raw vegan, so why am I saying this as a raw vegan? Well, because that's only half the story. If you're cooking vegetables and you're releasing more vitamins or minerals than you would get otherwise, what does that say about the other vitamins and minerals? Because heating could destroy some of those other vitamins and minerals, and you end up with less, right? So for example, broccoli, for example, there is a very powerful anti-cancer compound in broccoli called sulforaphane. Very powerful. You can get even more of it in broccoli sprouts. Very concentrated in broccoli sprouts. And sulforaphane is a very beneficial compound. That's great. If you cook the broccoli, you eliminate the sulforaphane. It all decomposes. So there's a tendency in the vegan space to oversimplify things. You hear a lot about enzymes in the raw vegan space. You want to eat raw vegan food because it's loaded with enzymes. Okay. Okay, that's great. And some enzymes even become activated by acids such as stomach acid. And that's all great. But even that is only part of the story. So yes, raw vegan is the healthiest diet around. It is. It's the healthiest diet on the planet. But there are nuances to this argument that you don't typically hear on other raw vegan channels. And that's the gap that I want to close. That's what I want to offer people. Because if you had somebody that was eating a typical American diet and they say, well, why should I go vegan? And you want me to eat raw on top of it? Why should I bother? What's the evidence? One guy says one thing, another guy says something else. What's the evidence? So I'm here to give that evidence, and I want to give it from a professional perspective. I can't tell you how many patients I've had in the ED who come in for something like constipation, right? So it's like, okay, well, let's give them an enema, or let's give them a bottle of mag citrate. And those things work. They do acutely. They'll work in an ER. They'll get things moving. But then the patient will ask me, well, what do I do when I go home? Okay, now let's talk.
Yeah.
Now let's talk. because it is within a nurse's scope of practice to talk about diet. Okay, let's talk. Let's talk about how to get things moving and keep things moving. And I will usually tell them, listen, for the next 3 days, eat nothing but fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. See what happens. And I say 3 days, I say 72 hours, because if I say, listen, for the rest of your life, eat nothing but fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, they're going to go, yeah, this guy's crazy. But if they go home and they eat fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds for 3 days, and they see the impact that it had, that may open up, number one, it's going to get them feeling better. It's going to eliminate their constipation, but it may open up their mind to think, well, I feel great. Maybe I can go one step further. Maybe day 4, maybe day 5. Or how else can I change my diet, my health, my lifestyle? And I use that as an opportunity. And it is within the nursing scope of practice to discuss diet. And fortunately, more doctors are climbing on board now. I was just listening to a podcast about a cardiologist who became vegan, I think 18 years ago, and then some time ago became raw vegan. And he has just some amazing stories on the patients that medicine just kind of gave up on, and the medical field just wrote them off. And he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you some green juice. We're going to give you some green smoothies. And they walked out of the hospital. And that's evidence. Yeah. That's evidence, and it astonishes me. I remember hearing one story of a woman with schizophrenia. She's suffering from schizophrenia, and she switched to fruitarian, which is just fruit, but nonetheless it's raw. And the voices went away.
Wow.
And the voices went away. And then she thought, So she went back to a regular diet, and the voices came back. And then she switched back to fruitarian, and the voices went away. It's like, okay, what do I make of that? I don't know. That's the one and only instance I've heard of someone with schizophrenia where their diet may have had an impact. Okay, but wouldn't the medical industry, the scientific field, want to grab a hold of that story and at least do research?
Yeah.
At least research it?
Yeah.
And that's not something I typically see. Although now I think there's more and more research coming. I think things are changing for the better.
Yeah. So. Great, Keith. Anything to close that you wished I had asked you? Did we cover the bases?
I think we covered the bases, but if I can, and I know this is only the first episode, but for the people who are watching, they're not in the best of health, and they want a healthier life, and their health problems are not acute. You're not in the middle of having a heart attack and in need of being seen by a medical doctor in an emergency room, but you're going through chronic issues, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and the like. I would want to encourage them, if they're thinking about changing their lifestyle, encourage them and go one step at a time. Mm-hmm. Some people go all in, and that's great. If you can go all in, that's great. But if you're the typical person out there who wants to eat healthier, but you have a problem with emotional eating or food addiction, then I would say take it one step at a time. You're not a type 2 diabetic, or you are a type 2 diabetic and your sugar's not that bad, and you really love the carbs, then use the addiction to your advantage. Go get some carbs. Eat bananas, strawberries, blueberries, pineapple. Go for the fruit and replace your existing carbs with the fruit. Make that step number 1. Small steps. Rome wasn't built in a day. but make those changes,
Right.
so that over time those changes build, right? And I would encourage that person to pursue a healthier diet. Do it one step at a time, but you can do this. People do. And on the other side of the typical American diet that you're eating, on the other side of the emotional eating, or maybe even the food addiction, on the other side of that is a world full of health and freedom and better living. And I want that for everybody. I want that for everybody, not just the people who watch this channel. I want that for everybody. That's why I became a nurse.
Well, you're a man of service, and that was a great way to end your first podcast it's in the can, so to speak.
It's in the can. It's in the can.
So thanks, Keith.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Yep.